Okay, welcome back, everyone, to the second panel of the McGill International Entrepreneurship Industry Forum. So just before I introduce Alex, I just want to say thanks very much to Professor Sharon Lone, who did a spectacular job. I think she's in the other room. Are we having coffee? That's okay. She'll be happy, I told her already, with the panel. And thanks so much to the performance of the panel. It was tremendous, the insights you shared with us and the practicalities and really the kind of common sense approach also that one has to use as well, that can't really be covered so much by theory, or it comes between theory and understanding them. We also need the pragmatic approach to managing the Born Global and the growth of it. Okay, moving on to the industry panel 2. The discussion theme for the panel is the commercialisation of innovation for internationalisation, product before market. And I'm delighted and very grateful that the panelists are particularly those individuals that work in the nascent startup companies that typically would potentially be globally orientated. And firstly, we have Dr. Paul Agnam, who runs the Innovate program in NUI Galway, and particularly targeting the medical device sector. And he's going to talk about that. We then also have John Breslin, who's equivalently, he runs and manages the Tech Innovate program at NUI Galway. So we have two NUI Galway kind of showcasing the entrepreneurship programs we have, particularly one in the ICT with Tech Innovate and the other one in the MedTech with BioInnovate. Then I'm delighted to welcome Adele Brown, who's really so impressive. She's a third-year biotechnology student and she's created her own business. So we'll be looking forward to hear Adele as well. And Declan Clark is the next, and Declan has many creative ideas, and he's going to talk about them in terms of different areas of business. Brendan Woods is joining us for the second panel. And Brendan was originally on panel 1, and I really thank you for still coming and not giving up on the N59. Okay, it's very easy to. But thanks for coming, Brendan. And Brendan is the founder of the Born Global and the CEO of the Born Global company Auto Entry by Ocrex. So I'm going to introduce to Professor Alex Ralph, and I'm delighted Alex also is a dear friend. From the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Alex has a very established reputation in international SMEs and international entrepreneurship. And I'm delighted that Alex can moderate this panel for us, so I leave it over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Natasha. And well, I just want to start saying that I'm very, very pleased to be here and meeting you all, and meeting also the attendees to this McGill Conference, International Entrepreneurship here in Galway. I have to say that this is a special, I would say, special conference attendance for me, because most of you have just come Galway yesterday, I think, and are leaving perhaps on Saturday or even before. But in my case, this year, it was, I planned to do a research stay here in National University of Ireland. And by chance, it was also linked to the organization of the McGill conference. So I've had the chance to arrive here before, more than 2 months before, actually. And I have had a very nice opportunity to dive a little bit more than usual in the country that you visit. Otherwise, when you just go 2-3 days to a conference, you don't really notice where you are. But I have had that luck. And I have to say that this is my 5th time in Ireland, I think. This is the 5th time I come to this country. And the more times I come and the longer I stay and the more people I meet, the more I love this country. I'm thinking about that way. I'm leaving soon, like most of you, on most likely on Saturday. And I'm sure I'm going to start missing a little bit things I've met here, like Natasha, first of all, but also Brian, who is around there. And also, I think things I've discovered here, like Shop Street, nice concept. And Galway races, I also had the chance to go. I'm not that sure I want to be missing very much the very windy days in the Connemara or the heavy rain that it's around the wild Atlantic Way all the day. So, but anyway, let's start with this second panel. We were talking this morning in the doctoral colloquium about methodologies, and one that seemed to be creating a lot of attention was narrative approaches and listening to stories by entrepreneurs and by practitioners. And I think this is a perfect moment to apply this kind of approach. So these people, I'm sure, have very passionate stories to tell us, okay? So let's start with more or less this second panel with Paul, with Adele, with John, with Declan and Brendan. Brendan, as mentioned by Natasha, is like joining. Thank you for doing. A very first question that I would like to raise to you all is a little bit for contextualize also the people here, is a little bit which tend to be the key, let's say, objectives or characteristics or role that your organizations, because in some cases can be ventures, businesses, but others seem to be other type of organizations, and or programs you are involved, which more or less are their characteristics and your role there. Okay, so I don't know, you can start.
Sure. Evening all, Declan Clark here. For us, we have set up maybe 10 years ago now a Hatchery of Ideas in that very windy, bleak Connemara that you mentioned, just out past recess. We took over an old salmon hatchery, and we asked the question, what if we could commercialize innovations that had impact? So that was the founding principle of what we were to do. And our goal then was to scan the horizon, identify issues in society that we consider to be of significance and where we felt that there were substantive issues. And then we looked to ourselves to see, could we innovate solutions that would match those problems? So the range, for example, we've gone through quite a few startups, and we've closed quite a few. We've been because it's our own money, it's all our own investment. There's no state until a certain point, and then we go and look for state, but we invest everything ourselves. So we're quite brutal if something doesn't look as if it's working. So the range that we've looked at, for example, would be one of our companies, Advanced Science. We've identified that the honeybees were in severe crisis and that there was a food needed. So we innovated and blended, researched, and did the trials on food. So we now sell a honeybee food supplement in 31 countries. And then at the other range of the spectrum, we're using a tropical marine coral that we grow as a biomedical device. So we cover quite a spectrum. And in between that, we have food and the aquarium business as well. So our objectives are always, though, the core of it is that because of the facility we had opportunities to make money. But the critical one for us was that it had to have a societal impact, something positive. Not saying that we're, green industries or anything like that, but something that you could stand back and look behind you and think that you were proud of having done that.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Natasha, and the organisers for the invitation. Delighted to be here. So I'm Paul with BioInnovate Ireland, and what's the context, I guess, behind BioInnovate and what is BioInnovate? So Galway is one of the best ranked medtech clusters in the world, and it has a huge amount of major multinationals, startups, and SMEs here. It has some talent in engineering and commercial spaces. And where does BioInnovate fit in? The fellowship program was created in 2011, so we're just into our 7th year. And it was created really at a time of a recession and has a focus on promoting the generation of new startup companies. So we are housed in the academic institution here in NUI Galway. We collaborate with other institutions around the country, UL, UCC, but we have a completely commercial focus. So the idea is merging design thinking, so needs-led innovation with design thinking meets entrepreneurship in a regulated environment. We didn't invent the model. It was invented by Stanford Biodesign, who are now affiliates and partners of ours. They've been running it 17 years in Silicon Valley, and so we tweaked the model very slightly and rolled it out here. I want to be clear when I use the word need and needs-led, because it's a word that's used a lot, and maybe some people have different definitions. And from our perspective, a need is an unmet or undermet clinical need, not currently well addressed by solutions on the market with a really strong market opportunity. So I suppose the model for us is if Henry Ford asked us what we wanted, we made a may have said faster horse, and we're looking for the car. And it's out there trying to find unmet needs in defined clinical areas, map the market. If those two line up, it's a valid need, it's a valid market, then go to solution. So that's the focus, really. We're running now 7 years. There are over 23 emerging startups. Some have spun out, some have been acquired on the back of it. Over half of our alumni have gone that direction. The other half have then gone back into government agencies, back into major multinationals, bringing that innovation model with them. A dual focus for us then is doing this entrepreneurship or innovation training in industry to promote the research arm of the R&D companies, both indigenous and major multinational here. So.
Okay, so it doesn't work. Oh, it does work. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm John. I'm also from NUI. Broken. It works. Okay. It was just me. No, it's not. No, it's kind of broken. I think that's this one. When I said NUI, and then there was.
That's John Victor, NUI.
I was just joking. This one does work. So I'm from NUI Galway, and you know, a bit like what Paul has described there, I've been working on a program, but our primary focus has been developing something similar, but for the tech space. And my colleagues like Michael, who's here, and Natasha, and others, we are trying to bring entrepreneurship skills to new cohorts. So, for example, we also run a fellowship program, and some of our fellows are here this evening, developing innovations for different areas, including agriculture and so on. And actually, some of the attendees at the conference have, like Alex and Antonella and Vinciane, have gratefully helped out this week because we've been running a program for our Tech Innovate Fellows, but also for PhD students to bring them entrepreneurship skills. So we have at the back here a lot of our scientists and engineers and computer scientists who have been learning about the process of entrepreneurship. So you talked about storytelling, Alex, and you know, often in entrepreneurship education, there's a lot of storytelling where people kind of, you know, come in and you hear this inspiring talk, but it doesn't really tell you what to do next. So, you know, what we are doing is trying to bring that process, or the disciplined entrepreneurship process, which is actually from MIT, to different cohorts of people, either engineers, scientists, professionals in industry, or even just people who are interested in going down the entrepreneurial route, but they don't know how to start. So, I suppose what I've been looking at with my colleagues again is, you know, how can we deliver these entrepreneurship skills to new cohorts, whether they be, you know, ad hoc workshops, or you know, to our PhD students, or to fellows, or to people in industry as well. As you heard in the previous panel, Ireland is a small country, we have a small market, therefore our aim has to be, as Natasha mentioned, you know, born global ambition, because we're too small a market anyway. So by encouraging people in the entrepreneurship process, which is directed towards innovation-driven entrepreneurship, then they are thinking outside of the small boxes that is Ireland anyway.
It's a nice example of a young women entrepreneur here in the panel as well, so I'm glad to see that.
Thank you very much. My name is Adele Brown, and I'm going into final year in my undergraduate degree in biotechnology in NUI Galway. But I've also founded a company called Free Feet Medical, and we're developing a device for people with Parkinson's disease. So every hour someone in the UK and Ireland is diagnosed with Parkinson's, and about 72% of those suffer from a symptom called gait freezing. So it's basically like a shuffling movement that they experience in their legs and feet. And the device that we're developing at the moment, we're currently prototyping our second iteration of the device, from our early stage tests with the Galway Parkinson's Association, we found that it can reduce the severity of the shuffling movement by up to 40%. So that's what I'm working on mainly. And also I work as the entrepreneur in residence in the Blackstone Launchpad at NUIG. So what that is basically is a hub for undergrads who might have an idea for a business, who might want to set one up or just kind of learn more about entrepreneurship in general. And we run events, we do coaching sessions, and provide mentorship and that kind of thing to help them, I suppose, get to the next stage with their business. So that's...
Hello, my name is Brendan Woods. I'm a founder, and I continue to build a software company that leverages various bits of technology to automate data entry for accountants and bookkeepers. Probably less exciting in some respects to some of the interesting research that these guys have familiarity with, but again, maybe comes from a background of me spotting an opportunity, or rather a problem that I thought could be solved, and running with a series of prototyping, early market validation, and then eventually quitting my job and giving it a go. So that's what I do, and I hope maybe I might be able to share some opinions that reflect more of a business builder type perspective on some of the approaches to where the product comes before market or vice versa and so on, as the topic suggests. Sorry, I took it.
So, okay, thank you for this introduction to more or less your type of activities. For those of you who have had, let's say, a direct experience in business creation, one issue that it's also always very interesting for us is how in some way the opportunities is recognized, okay? And there is great debate if opportunities are discovered or opportunities are created. Or so in your experience in this context, could you tell us, for instance, how did you spot it? How did you spot the opportunity for your firm to emerge, or the different firms you mentioned? Was it conceived as a basically domestic opportunity, or you foreseen from the very beginning the international potential of the opportunity you spotted? Okay, I don't know, anyone who wants to.
In each of our ventures, we've had a slightly different approach. So if we go back to the bee food, with advanced science, we actually started advanced science with a concept of adding value to honey in a functional sense. And we had a very good concept there. But as we got into the market and we began to understand the supply of honey and the issues that were affecting the supply of the honeybee, we could see that there was this global crisis called a colony collapse disorder, where up to 80% of people's bees were just dying over the winter. So we began to research that because we were just very curious about it, and we uncovered that there was actually a microsporidium, a small little virus-like creature, which was inhabiting the gut and was having a huge impact on CCD. So yes, pesticides, monoculture, all of those things were playing a role. Varroa, some of the big issues. But there were other issues that we could see that others hadn't tracked. So we began the journey then to see, well, how could you possibly feed a bee something to give it a silver bullet against this imported invasive disease? So that's how we started with that, is that we began in the sector, innovating within the sector, and then realized that there was a very substantial issue. With food, it's slightly different because, yes, we have European ambitions, global, it remains to be seen, but we certainly have the ambition of being, with the functional ingredients that we have, of being on every supermarket and convenience store across the EU. And that, when we began, we knew that was going to be our target, but in that business, the most important thing is that you prove yourself nationally. Before you go anywhere internationally, you have to have a very solid home base, particularly in the food sector, which is very different than any other sector I've worked in. For the biomedical, using our coral as a bone graft substitute. With that one, it was always going to be international, and most likely we launch in the States first. We're aiming for our preclinicals in January, and more than likely 15 months after that, we should be looking at getting an FDA approval. Our CE mark approval for Europe and those countries will come after that. So by launching in the States, it means we can have an extension into Australia and Asia. So we certainly always begin with the international view, knowing that in some cases you need to prove the product or the concept at home. Yeah.
Any, I don't know, your cases, for instance, that are also, this is working, I think.
Will I try this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll pass over to my friends.
Experience in business creation.
Yeah, so I was going to tell a story of I've had actually 4 startups, but one of those was very much, as you described, fulfilling a need. So 20 years ago, I set up a website which became a very popular discussion forum in Ireland. So we set up a company called boars.ie, and it's still one of Ireland's bigger websites. We get about 2 million visitors a month. to the website. So it's discussing anything to do with Ireland. But after a few years, we created a forum to talk about different topics, but we created one where people could buy and sell items. So they were creating discussions saying, I've got something for sale, and then somebody would reply saying, I'd like to buy that. And we realized very quickly, because it grew so large, that there was an opportunity that was not being fulfilled. So we spun out another company called Adverts.ie, which was a classified ads website, and a lot of the Irish people probably have used this to buy and sell stuff. And it was really that emerging need that we saw people want to buy and sell stuff. They're using the wrong thing to do it. They're using a forum, and they should be using a dedicated classified ads website. So that kind of evolved out of a market need. In the reverse direction, I've been involved in companies where we've tried to create something that people didn't want yet. And when the iPad came out first, I was involved in we set up a US company to create a very, what we thought impressive newsreader for reading news on the iPad. But we made the mistake of going technology first, so product first and not market first. And actually we kept on adding on more and more parts to this application. And by the time we'd added a thing that did three things instead of one, we'd burned through all our money and had no money to actually market and make sure that the customer wanted it. So sometimes it's needs driven or should be needs driven, and sometimes it doesn't.
Actually, it's pretty much linked with this debate also that sometimes we found in academic forums about market driven or product driven type of innovation. Maybe it's one problem solving orientation for more the product, but then you realize that other approach is just first conduct some market research, identify a need, identify a market segment, and then come up with the best solution for that. In your case, in your experience, how is it? How the opportunity was recognized in some way? It was more a market-driven, or it was more a product-driven type of innovation, perhaps, or you not that much in the context of innovation, of technological innovation, but other type. I don't know what you can tell about it. So.
In our case, it was quite accidental, to be honest. So I started the project originally as a project for a science fair here called the BT Young Scientist Exhibition when I was in 5th year in secondary school. So literally made the first iteration of the device and tested it with the Parkinson's Association as my project, and didn't think it would ever go any further than that. From a family of scientists, I probably hadn't even heard the word entrepreneur before I landed myself in it. So it was very much needs driven, I suppose, and I think in medical device it has to be needs driven, because otherwise it's a waste of time. So I have a neighbour with Parkinson's, and I started the project to see if there was any way I could help her, and then scaled it up, I suppose, to the Parkinson's Association test. And we've gone from there then. So I've kind of used the last 3 years, I suppose, on the business aspect, and to be honest, learning it as I go, because I'm in science myself. I'm not getting any formal training in it. But yeah, I suppose it was really from that, and I think it definitely has to be needs driven in most cases to make sure you get the best outcome of it anyway.
What's your point of view, Brendan? What's the point of view about that?
In my personal circumstance, it was very much opportunity driven, I think. I was a software developer and came from a background of having a fair exposure to, let's say, an understanding as to what I thought was probably possible. And then being exposed to a routine business, let's say, hindrance that a person of a totally different skill set would experience on a regular basis, but would not necessarily know that there could be a possible solution, capable of solving the problem for them. So from my perspective, I came across what seemed like an apparent need, but that said, it still had to be validated because I wasn't the type of user that was experiencing it. So from my perspective, I saw something that I thought that I might be able to solve, I might be able to automate, I might be able to reduce, a sort of a tedious overhead to a particular skilled job. And I just took that and I started playing with, seeing if I could find a solution. I figured the technology was probably there, and it was a case of marrying a problem with the right bits and pieces that you could sellotape together to solve the problem. And then, of course, bringing it to market was a whole different thing, which was, from my perspective, very much market-driven, because I was a software developer in the middle of Ireland's greatest recession. I wasn't going to quit my well-paying, cushy job for a venture that didn't have any sort of clear viability. So for me, there was a lot of early sort of market feedback to be sought, and I would have went out to what I thought was the addressable market and sought their feedback to say, hey, this is what I'm building. This is a horrific early prototype, but you can see kind of where I'm going, and this is where I expect it'll get to. What do you think? What do you think it's good as it is? Do you have any ideas of what else it might do? And bear in mind, one of the good points that was made earlier about I want a faster horse and really they want a car, is sometimes people don't have the imagination to know what's possible. So you do have to be able to ask the questions in an open-ended fashion to seek not just their suggestions, but also the broader problems that might not have been apparent in the early prototyping stage. And then to be able to bring the expertise of someone with knowledge of the solution space, or what will hopefully become the solution, to maybe prepare something that is more complete and offers a really robust commercial solution to the problem at hand.
Yeah, just very quickly, I was picking up a little bit on some of those points. From the activity that we operate, it's all teed up where the multidisciplinary team is built for the fellowship. So you take, I'll tell the story, I'll give an example of Embo Medical. They came in our first year, they were a team with 2 engineers, 1 commercial person and 1 clinician. They went out into the hospital, they're looking for problems. They're standing there one day watching a clinician trying to block a blood vessel. And they're putting a bunch of coils in there, the coils are migrating, it's taking longer, the patient's on the table longer, and the 4 of them just came out and went, surely there has to be a better way to fix it. Explored the market, there wasn't a better way to fix it currently on the market. Went away, validated that market size was big enough that ultimately a VC might want to put money in, or a major would want to acquire it. So that's a filter for them in terms of they don't want needs with markets less than, you know, 500,000. They filter out other projects. They say no science projects. If it needs bench research, we're not interested. It's not commercially ready enough. And they went ahead and they actually developed, secured further funding, developed a solution, and then went from spin out at a couple of million to acquisition in 18 months because they were quickly snapped up by one of the medtechs. And it was because they went in and found a need and married it with a solution that they could, like you said, sellotape bits together to fix that need to address the market. So.
Okay, I wanted to take the issue also to because we have 2 or 3 members here in the panel who are also linked to the university in a very clear way, and one issue in which we also conduct, some of you perhaps conduct some research, has to do with in some way the role of research-oriented organizations, like for instance universities, like for instance National University of Ireland here in Galway. What kind of role they do for promoting university, let's say university-based technology entrepreneurship, many times in the form, for instance, of university-based spin-offs firms, right? In this particular case, in this university, if you know it or contact with others, how do you think university can provide a help for this type of spin-offs to emerge? Is basically in terms of research and innovation, commercialization, is other type of help that the university is providing, is helping this spin-off to become also international in some manner. So which is mostly those of you who are in both contexts. What do you think about that? Okay, since John.
I shall try. So I think it's a multi-strand approach, okay? On one hand, you want to increase the research and innovation capabilities of a region. On the other hand, you want to be able to obviously translate those into spin-outs and startups. And they are quite separate things, as all our academic audience will know, and our PhDs, the requirements of academia and research are quite different from, having said that, one of our national funding agencies, Science Foundation Ireland, is moving more towards having as its metric spin-outs and startups emerging from its scientifically funded research centres. So, for example, in Galway, I suppose I think most people would who work in university in Galway are a big part of the local ecosystem, because we are a small city in the west of Ireland, and the student and staff cohort in NUI Galway, for example, is anywhere from 20% to 25% of the city, depending on kind of what time of year it is or when the students are here or not. We've about 20,000 staff and students in NUI Galway, and then another additional 7,000 in GMIT, out of a total population of 70 or 80,000. So when you look at it in terms of the impact you can have, it's huge because of that big part you're playing. So anyway, the research and innovation has been developed, and it's really only in the past 10, 15 years, I suppose, that we've really upped our game in terms of research and innovation. Science Foundation Ireland established centres for ICT or biotech in various places around Ireland, and in Galway we had 2 of those. So that helps because you're skilling people up in the deep tech and the deep technologies that you need then for those spin-outs. But you also need to, as BioInnovate and Tech Innovate and Blackstone Launchpad are doing, you also need to give people the skills to be entrepreneurial. It is a totally different thing to come to the end of your PhD and even have to try and think about how do you commercialize stuff. What are all the considerations, especially if you're a science or engineering graduate? It's a different world. So, but it's not impossible to merge parts of those. Not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, as we know. It could be 1%, it could be 5% in different universities, depending where you are. But you can look to inspirational models of what they've done in Stanford or in MIT, which, when you take all of the companies created or international entrepreneurial people will know these kind of numbers. You have an ecosystem that is equivalent to the size of the 11th largest country in the world. So you can aspire to go in that direction by bringing together that deep tech and also the entrepreneurial know-how to translate it into spin-outs.
Yeah, I suppose I come at it from a slightly different, not different, I share your perspective, but I have a different experience or skill set. So I'm not a traditional academic. I left academia and went into industry, and I left industry to come back into the BioInnovate project because it was a really commercially focused but academically housed but forward-facing project. So I think our university and other universities in this country have been courageous. And 7 years ago, when people went out and said, we need to do this needs-led innovation model, who's in from an academic institution perspective, one or two institutions said, we don't know if it's feasible. We don't know if you can actually get this to operate. And 2 or 3 were courageous enough to say, you know what, actually, we're going to take a punt on this and we're going to back it. We're lucky then that we have regional support and national supports like Enterprise Ireland. I know Barry was on the panel earlier. They've put a lot of support into our program and the projects that come out of it. So I think the universities were willing to take the risk on something a little bit with a different focus and a more commercial focus. I have this discussion quite a lot with industry and how do you promote innovation in industry, and it's almost like you have to take your R&D arm out and sit it outside to get it to be innovative. And that's almost what they've done with programs like ours. There's a lot of flexibility and independence to collaborate and to be forward-facing, and that's not your traditional academic approach. So we don't sit in a silo, we collaborate across multiple centers, we collaborate across multiple disciplines. We have a European-funded Pan-EU fellowship, we have interaction with Mayo and Stanford, so we've been given that freedom to just go out and grow almost in a startup mentality. And I think I commend the university on, I suppose, the foresight or the willingness to let the risk be taken. And in parallel, there's great work going in growing your traditional research and increasingly on translating. I was at one of those SFI centers this morning with Infant in Cork. So they're focused on neonatology, and we're just talking about, can we deliver more training for their PhD students and their postdocs to have a commercial focus and think about their project from, can this project ultimately translate into a commercializable opportunity? So it's multiple strands. It's traditional research, commercialization research, and then these other programs that are completely flipped. They're purely commercial focus.
In your case, for instance, Adele, has NUI played any role in the existence and development of free feed medical Is there any connection to it?
Close our ears.
Yes, very much so. So I suppose going to put on my Blackstone Launchpad hat here for a second. So essentially what we do is we're, as I said, a hub for undergrad entrepreneurs. So more so than the postgrad or the academic side of things. If you're like in second year of commerce or engineering, or it doesn't matter what course you're in, and you have an idea, let's say it's not at like the stage of development that PhD students would be, but at the same time it's definitely worth kind of exploring, and you want to kind of learn more about the entrepreneurship aspect, that's where we come in. So unlike the more traditional university structure, the technology transfer office, we provide the support and the mentoring and the in some cases the funding to a small degree, to actually kind of explore and do the feasibility studies on that idea, but don't take any equity. And I think that's very important because at that stage, and with that little formal training in entrepreneurship, a lot of people don't actually have that equity hat on, and they don't realise that. In terms of the impact that being part of the network and the university and the Launchpad has had on Free Feet, it's been absolutely massive for us. To be honest, I don't think it would still be in existence without it. So I came into university in first year and went to the technology transfer office, and they were just like, there's no precedent for this, we don't know what to do with you. So I was like, okay, and kind of went away and stayed working on it for another 6 months, I suppose. And in the meantime, the Blackstone Launchpad proposals were kind of going in, and that was starting to be developed. So I was like, okay, I'll keep going with it and see if I can kind of work through this space instead. And that has made a massive difference. So in terms of our development, I think the big thing for us in terms of being partnered with the university is it's a lot easier to get press, which helps from funding and competitions and that kind of thing. It's a level of credibility, I suppose, that you wouldn't really get independently in a lot of cases. And as well as that, like, we've had some great opportunities through it. So I got to pitch at the Forbes 30 Under 30 conference in Boston last October. And that wouldn't have happened without the support of the Launchpad. So for us, it's been absolutely massive. Yeah.
Okay, we're running time, but anyway, before perhaps giving the audience the possibility also to make any comment or question or whatever to you, in this case with Brendan and perhaps also with Declan, what kind of challenges do you see before you in the coming years, or even more, or even put differently, what kind of challenges you want to overcome in the coming years in your respective activities, or for instance relating more directly innovation and internationalization, or what kind of challenges you have put yourself to achieve?
Sure. I think with our biomedical venture, because it's such a new area for us, we have, somebody mentioned in the panel earlier from Rina Mara, that we have a lot of knowledge to gain. Now we're fortunate, you alluded to it here in terms of the role that the university plays in the ecosystem or in the cluster that's happening around Galway. We found that the biomedical sector, equally, Paul would know a lot of these guys, they're incredibly generous. So in terms of us gaining that knowledge, we found that Galway's been a very nice place to grow a company like this. For us, a major challenge for any medical device is regulation and obviously fundraising. You need a lot of money, as Adele will know, to make any progress in a biomedical device. So raising, and it's not so much money, because we've closed 2 investment deals this year so far for some of our companies, and the company that I'm involved in outside of INA is a women's gifting project that we're going to launch hopefully October, November. Beautiful, bloom in the box. That, we've got funding lined up for that. So we'll close 3 investment deals this year in the companies I'm involved in. So there is funding out there, but I think the right kind of funding is I can't reiterate it enough for anybody who's looking to get into this, is that the investors, particularly if you're dealing with angel investors, with VCs, it's probably more clear-cut, because they tend to be upfront with their deal sheet, and you know what the deal is in advance. Everybody's experienced and everybody knows the game. Oftentimes when you take on private angel investors, they may not be as experienced in investing in a new venture as you assume. So people begin to make assumptions about each other's skill sets and capabilities, and that can lead to communication and confusion. So I think the right kind of funding, you know. And I think that to navigate these, you have to have an absolute blinding belief in what you're doing, you know, almost to the point of failure, you know.
How about you, Keynes, what the kind of challenges you want to...
I don't think we have enough time.
The main one.
There is lots. I think, but from the day one, from the first Monday morning that you're no longer employed, I think you're thrown in the deep end of challenges and problems that you never possibly expected would you know, come to be faced. But I think it's not that they get easier or they get smaller. I think people get better at dealing with them. I think a lot of people have their greatest challenges in the first couple of years, and I'm sure, well, I hope we did too. Funding is certainly one, and in Ireland as well, as I've more exposure to other companies in a similar kind of situation or stage of development as our own company, we've seen, you know, criticism of Irish startups exiting too early, and there's lots of these trends that are emerging. And some of it comes down to funding, some of it comes down to levels of dilution in the early stages of growth. Some of that, I think, could be repaired with, or at least alleviated to some extent, with better education for those people at the earlier stages, because often they're not necessarily met with the right information until they're already at a certain stage that they're already in a difficult situation. And that's not to say that the information is not there. It's just sometimes people don't know where to go exactly to get it. And sometimes the level of experience needed, even at the early stage, tends to come from people that become available to you at a later stage. So there's lots of challenges, and going forward for us, I can't tell you what the future is going to lie or hold for us, but I think what we are seeing is that at different stages of growth, you face different types of problems. So at this stage of growth now, we have got through, I think, some of the early stage hurdles. We supply about 3,000 accounting firms, and we have about 30,000 businesses on our solution. And we're going into new markets quite rapidly, and we're getting a lot of support now. And you know, people nowadays are saying to us, "Oh, now you're at a point where you're very fundable," and that's a challenge because you have to get to that point, because funding is not the same around the world. So in the US, even in London, access to funding based on level of progress you've made can be possibly a lot easier. Now, I give that some context. If you look at how VCs would fund companies in the US, you would see those Irish companies, many tech companies from Ireland that have made it to the US, tend to do quite well. Very often, because the struggle for them is to get there without having got too much dilution or got to the point where they'll take an early exit. So those that get there, and start getting their rounds of funding sourced outside the country, tend to have a better opportunity then. The multiples of valuation are higher. And I think part of that is just situational, in the sense that to get to prototype in Silicon Valley is very expensive. To get to the first iteration of product release is very, very expensive. And therefore, there's an understanding or an acceptance over there that a certain amount of money has to go in before you can expect to get to a certain stage or position in terms of revenue or growth. Whereas in Ireland, I think those multiples are very different, which means that there's a higher dilution at an earlier stage. Anyway, that's purely on the funding front. I think the sort of issues that we are likely to face now is more growing pains, right? We're a company that, although based in Dublin and started in Dublin, we immediately set up in the UK in terms of our sales operation. Our first sales employee was based in the UK. We kind of saw it as it might as well be one market, except there's 63 million people there and there's 5 million people here, and our addressable market was largely correlated to population. So we could say, well, why would we bother start here? So I think that also depends on the type of product or service you're offering, but in our case, it didn't matter. So we said, well, we'll start there, and that's what we did. But now the thing is, we've just opened an office in Melbourne, we've just set up a subsidiary company in the US, and time zones become difficult, operations become different and difficult, because you need a lot more middle management operations. You can't just have a couple of founders who have the vested interest to run everything, because you can't work 24 hours a day. So, different challenges arise, trying to find management team candidates as opposed to functional candidates to fill roles in your organization. So they're the kind of things that we're starting to go into now, but hopefully we'll get through.
I'm sure that people in the audience that perhaps come up with any kind of common question, or it would be a good moment now.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tage Madsen from Denmark. When we do research, we sample on survivors. So we tend to look at success stories mainly, whether failures are more hidden, maybe they're forgotten, they're not there anymore. Some of you mentioned that you also had failures, startup failures. Can you see any similarities across failures that you have experienced? Could be interesting, maybe.
Yeah, and some of the ventures that we haven't advanced, we certainly identified that what we hadn't done is that we had either focused on the market or we had focused on the product. And we hadn't really brought the two together to see if there was a good match. So we had a very good guy or gal who had what we believed to be a really good, interesting innovation. We made perhaps certain assumptions about the market that we didn't really ground truth. And that meant that we brought it so far, and then the very expensive prototypes that we brought out, we realized they just weren't really fit for purpose. So I think for us was marrying the idea of the product and the need was critical. Oftentimes people can get very excited about having developed a new something, but unless somebody, I mean everyone here knows that, unless somebody really wants it, and when you go out to the market and you begin to realize that people don't want it, you have a challenge. Do you go back and completely re-innovate? Does the company have the capability to do that reinvention? Not every individual has the capability to reinvent and to all of a sudden no longer be providing this, but to take the humble pie and now to serve. So that would be for us certainly our experiences, yeah.
Anyone else?
I think for me, quite simply, no concept of the customer, who the paying customer is, and no approach to acquire that unknown customer. So spending all the money on, for two of my startups, on product, and worrying about who's going to pay for it afterwards, at which stage it's too late, but it's a simple thing. And you see it again and again. Even the companies I advise, they make the tech first and then try and think about who wants it afterwards. So that's not the best thing to do.
I'm just following Dr. Madsen's question or comment. In the United States, 80% of products don't see their first year birthday. They have already gone out of market. 90% of products don't make it to the 5th birthday. And this surprises me that two of the entrepreneurs say, you either look at the product or the market. That is somewhat surprising in the light of the statistics that exist.
Rephrase the question.
The phrasing is that eventually there has to be a solution for a problem. If you have a solution for non-existing problem, or you have a problem with non-existing solution, something is amiss. So if you have a product that has no market, or if there is a market that has no product, something is not working.
Timing, maybe. Usually I think if there isn't a need, it's because people haven't realised there isn't a need. Like, let's say in the medical device side of things, oftentimes people just don't have the foresight to realise that there might actually be a need there. But I think a lot of it in every aspect comes down to timing, in terms of the funding, in terms of who your team are, like whether or not you're going to make it. Like if Snapchat was developed 15 years ago, definitely wouldn't have. I mean, it's a lot of it is just down to luck, I think, at the end of the day, and whether or not you're good enough at spotting the luck, really, in a sense.
Yeah, I suppose there's an element of, maybe the problem wasn't really a problem, so it's not a good problem. Maybe the solution doesn't address the problem, so it's not a good solution. And maybe it's just bad execution or just bad luck. I mean, there's a combination of things I think that can happen there.
I think the example you said, if there's products being made, if there's products or solutions being made to which there's no problem, well, then it's not a solution. It's just a thing. I think, but at the same time, there's been a huge amount of very innovative products that emerged from research that had no goal, no commercial goal, right? So there has been a lot of research done in the past, particularly in tech space, that's from a business person's perspective might be said to be research for the sake of research. But at the same time, it could be at a later stage of that research that somebody outside, the principal investigators or whatever, actually spots where it could be used elsewhere, or it could be used in a different context, or it could be used to solve a different problem, or it could be augmented to solve a different problem. In which case, it could now become a hugely successful commercial product or solution, even though a business person would never have probably got it to that late stage of research, having not seen an opportunity at an early stage. So there's pros, there's different ways to look at it, right? I'm not someone from an academic research background, but I can appreciate some wonderful products that have come from it. Yet I can probably look at it and say, who thought to do that? Because there was probably, no one could see, I can't imagine a scenario where someone could see a commercial opportunity or possible end goal at the early stages of that research, possibly because the problem that it served to solve 10 years after the research started may not have even been a problem when the research was started. So there is a lot of funding from the EU that supports research, which a business person might not be able to say, I think that's a good investment. But yet there's lots of products that have come from research of that nature. In terms of, good products that fail, don't meet their first birthday or their fifth birthday. I've gone through some kind of mentorship type programs at the early stage of when I started the company. And there was other people in my group, and some of them I felt had very good ideas and very commercially savvy, proposed solutions to problems that existed. Many of them, possibly 90% of them, have not succeeded. But that doesn't mean that it was a bad idea or a bad solution, but maybe it's just a failed execution. Because there's lots of great ideas that don't necessarily have the founders that can can continue the development of that solution without running out of money, without being able to find customers for it to fund the growth or fund the further development of the product, or find the funding to further develop the product to solve the big problem. But I can't go and say, oh, I'd like to help out with that product or idea or business venture because I have my own. But lots of them fail. It doesn't mean they're all bad. Sometimes it's just the environment, such as in America, which was the context you gave. It's very expensive to build products. So, I've seen examples of where I was out in Silicon Valley myself a couple of years ago, and we were on a kind of a trip sponsored by Enterprise Ireland, Access Silicon Valley. And we met with lots of people, the professor of innovation from UCLA and experienced serial entrepreneurs. And there was one company we came across who had raised $4 million before they'd even got to their first proof of concept. That would be unheard of over here. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they have a better environment, because I can assure you at the time we were quoted a statistic that there was 30,000 startups in the Bay Area that were less than 2 years old. We don't see 30,000 startups, shooting up the Forbes list, because most of them fail, and probably a higher proportion based on the fact that they're under such excruciating pressure to get a product built so fast and be able to fund that to get to the place that they can start selling it. So it's not that all of these products are bad. It's not that there's something necessarily amiss. Usually there's good reason why these things don't end up being a great thing. Either because the execution didn't pan out, even though the idea was good, or as we said earlier, maybe the problem wasn't a big enough problem. So one of the key things I've seen is people come up with a great idea to solve a problem, and they want to go and chase it because they've come up with this great idea to solve a problem. But if that problem isn't big enough to be worth solving, or it's too temporal to be worth solving, well then what's going to happen is ultimately 12 months, or possibly less than 12 months' time, someone will have pointed out to them, that's not investable because the problem's too small. There's no addressable market.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we are really out of time already. We perhaps should last question in the room. The last question perhaps.
Tiia Visak from Estonia, Tartu University. The question is such: how much do you feel that in business is possible to plan step by step and follow the plan? And how much it's just a lucky chance, meeting the right person somewhere, lucky guess? What's the proportion? How do you feel about it?
I think as someone that started the business I'm still working on at 15 with absolutely no idea what an entrepreneur was, or no training or mentor at the time, an awful lot of it is luck, I would say. I think a very, very high proportion of it is putting yourself in the right room at the right time and making sure you get talking to the right people. It's kind of engineering serendipity in a sense, I think, because it's not always going to just be a lucky chance that you meet someone, but if you're in the right room at the right time, you're a lot more likely to meet the person. And I think that's been the approach I've taken in terms of making sure I'm in that room, and generally it has worked out very well, I think, so far.
Yeah, I don't believe the luck approach works. You make your own luck, as what Adele has described is planning. You're engineering your plan. So the process we're using in the Tech Innovate program is disciplined entrepreneurship, and you're planning every step along the way. You're planning your markets, so you're thinking about who could they be. You're planning a description of your customer. You're planning how to get at them. You're planning the whole knowledge of the life cycle of the product. You're planning your next markets. Everything is part of a plan. So by doing that, you're de-risking all of the effort and time and eventually money that you're putting into your startup. So I've had the lucky startups. I was a student when I set up my first company. Just set up this website, and suddenly it got bigger and bigger, and then, gosh, this is so big we can't do this as a hobby anymore. We've set up a company, and now everybody's using it. And what do? That happens. But if we could plan better, maybe we could have done something else. We set up an Irish website. Maybe we should have said, well, let's do the same thing internationally, which would involve, like Brendan's doing, setting up offices in different countries. We actually bought website domains for all of these countries, but we had no plan to how to actually realize that. We had, the company was called boards.ie, we had boards.us and boards.uk and boards.whatever, but it was just kind of a pipe dream and not planned. There was no strategy to say, gosh, we really need people in these countries, the local drivers doing stuff rather than this airy-fairy idea of being international. So planning is everything. There's lots of great material on entrepreneurship strategy, strategizing your sales, your people, your hiring, whatever, rather than doing anything ad hoc. I'm not luck is definitely what you make it.
Yeah, I was picking up on that, and it ties into the last question. It's you know, if your starting point is from an actual problem, that is a validated problem, that there isn't a solution for, that there is a market for, that is a proven market. I don't think there's a luck element to it. And in terms of planning, I was talking to one of our serial entrepreneurs the other day, and he was saying they spent 8 months writing their first business plan. And he successfully exited multiple companies and went into a fundraising meeting to meet with a VC, and they took the business plan and went, that's lovely, and threw it in a drawer and shut the drawer and said, now let's talk to you. And his point was that they had planned and planned and planned, and the plan had just gotten thrown into the drawer. And I think there's an element of, picking up on what John was saying, de-risking, being aware of what the obstacles are, and that's the model we would use. Is the idea behind our whole thing is fail fast and fail early. If it's not a good problem, not a good need, and you don't have a market for it, don't waste your time and someone else's money, just bin it and move on. And just being aware of what are all the barriers you're going to hit, particularly for us, we're in a heavily regulated industry. Reimbursement is an increasing problem, health economic benefit. If someone won't pay for it, don't make it. So you can't plan for all the obstacles, but knowing that obstacles are going to happen and anticipating that. And anybody I talk to who's done the journey or doing the journey, the problems come up that they never thought would come up. But if you can somewhat plan out or look ahead for what the roadblocks will be and have some strategy or even an awareness that it's going to be a roadblock, you're less likely to get tanked. So commercial de-risking is the strategy we advocate.
Yeah, I would agree that very little of it's luck. It's as they've said earlier, it's about placing yourself in that environment. So the 10 times you've been to a meeting where there was nobody, on the 11th time you were lucky because the guy was there who said, but you've been to those 10 meetings, as Adele said, you've planned for each of those. I think it's essential that a company writes a business plan, even though, as Paul says, they may well end up in the bin. But I think it's critical for that for a number of reasons. One is that everybody has a compelling understanding of what the vision is, and that everything you're doing is anchored and tied to that. So then even if it is opportunistic or it's coming from planning, it's driving to that similar agenda. I think we all appreciate having written business plans. Like I say, we've just got 2 funded this year. We know that the plan that we wrote 8 months ago is not what we're doing right now. We're doing something very different now. We've even rebranded one of our products comprehensively. And one of our investors was asking, where's about this? They couldn't understand that we had changed so much. So yeah, the planning process is very dynamic, but it's absolutely essential that everybody has gone through that process,
Just one quick thing. I think it depends what the plan is about. If the plan is about how you get your customers, then that's a great plan. If the plan is about how you're going to hire and how these numbers and stuff, then it's probably not good. So I've heard this recently that if there was a course that by the end of it you develop a business plan, that's fine. But the course that could that by week 6 you would have customers, that would be much better. But there's no reason you can't do both. If your plan is based on your strategy to grow some customers that you already have, then that's better. So. That's the key element of the plan, getting those customers.
All right, I think it's 9:15 already, which is perhaps the moment to end the session. But thank you really very much, the audience, and mostly the panel members. Okay.